Welcome to the Hive from Pollen VC, your destination for the latest thinking about mobile gaming, apps, and what you need to scale your business. And introducing Peggy Ann Sauls, founder of Mobile Groove, mobile analyst, tech consultant, and your host for today's show.
Gaming in Eastern Europe is on an impressive trajectory, but where is the opportunity? What is the investment climate? Why do gaming companies and studios there have to literally up their game? Well, it's tough questions, yes, but we get straight answers, as always, on The Hive because we have my guest, Marvin Liao. He is board member and partner of Game Groove Capital. Cool name, Marvin. And as I said, welcome to The Hive. And to kick it off, you are, as I said, an investor and executive coach. You have a long track record in expanding businesses across a number of companies, your earlier role, for example, at Yahoo. But now the focus on Eastern Europe. What is so exciting here?
I've been a big fan of the region. So I used to run this region for Yahoo. So I ran a big chunk of the EMEA region for many years. So I became very, very familiar with it probably since 2006, 2007. The level of the technical talent, just the growth of the middle class over here, and just the hunger in general. I mean that in a good way, right? Like not in a negative way, in a good way. And so it was one of those things I noticed sort of fairly early, mainly because when I was here for Yahoo selling ads, they spent money on ads. So you kind of pay attention. You're like, how do these people have all this money to spend on advertising? So that definitely, I would say even back then, that really opened up my eyes to sort of like the gaming opportunity.
Absolutely. There are a lot of hidden gems here. I've written about quite a few as well. And they keep coming, right? But what's interesting is that before it was like, okay, well, these are studios that do work for hire, a lot of them. And they were getting names because they were, part of that inner circle, as it were. But now they're producing titles for the market on their own terms and having some great hits. Tell me about that dynamic here. Is it changing? Is it really like, hey, I was doing work for hire, but I'm in it now on my own, and that's where the excitement is?
Yeah, looking at this from a macro perspective, right? I think in the beginning, so my family drifts from Taiwan, so you're like, where's this going? What ends up happening when you start off as sort of like service on the back end, and you're like, wait a minute, we learned how to do this, go to the next level of just, you develop expertise. You're like, we want to push it a little bit more. Then once you sort of push it a little bit more, you're like, wait a minute, like all the work we're kind of doing all the back end of it. We could probably start moving into more of the UX piece. You do the UX piece, you're like, wait a minute, like developing the user acquisition or even doing distribution deals, like we can figure that piece out too. And so it's almost this like progression, right? Of just like, I hate that term value chain, but sort of going out the value chain, which is what's happening in almost every country, in every industry. Once you develop some level of expertise, you're like, wait a minute, this is boring to just do this. Like, let's go to the next level. And I think you're also seeing a lot of folks who've actually worked in sort of like more advanced markets and gaming markets sort of coming back. And so you kind of see how this dynamic of sort of folks coming down this way and other folks going from the bottom up, right? And so it's just natural this is going to happen.
It's about also the investment opportunities. And you are interested in investment. I'd like to understand what's attractive to you. What's attractive when you're looking at companies, or how do they make themselves attractive?
Yeah, I spent 6 years as a venture capitalist, and you would think in some ways that prepares you very well for sort of investing in the gaming space. In some ways it does, in some ways it doesn't. You have to learn sort of like new rules of, gaming. There's just very different dynamics and very different players. And so one of the things I look for obviously is just we hear this a lot of like, well, we look at teams, right? Like teams are really, really important. Yeah, that's definitely true. So for example, like one of the things that we look at very closely is like mobile gaming. And so just to mention sort of what we do, Game Groove is a holding company. So we're an operating company where we do some investments off the balance sheet, but we also have a lot of different sort of IP assets in different studios. So in some cases, we're actually fundraising for some of our studios or spinning them off. And in other cases, we're actually investing ourselves, where it's like, oh, that's a really interesting, like studio or interesting product or IP that actually fits our portfolio. So we're kind of doing sort of a bit of both. And so we're a little bit of mongrel versus sort of like a pure sort of VC fund, which is sort of what I worked at before. And so a lot of it is we're looking at where I would say we're probably a little bit more of a strategic investor. And so our filter is a little bit different, but you're still looking for like awesome teams, How does this fit within sort of our portfolio? So for example, like, hey, we're pretty strong on like the mid-core area, but like honestly, one area we're looking very closely at is like the hyper casual, right? Like one of the fastest growing areas. We don't have a play in the hyper casual area. And so we're looking at that as just like, well, do we go build that ourselves? Or maybe we just go find a studio or a team that's actually really, really good there, and we can sort of supercharge them.
I love that. So now we know it's mid-core where you're strong, where you have your foothold. You're interested in hyper casual, making themselves attractive for investment, or I guess you'd call it partnership support. What is it? Are you looking for, amazing IP? You said teams, but what else?
I actually think user acquisition is really, really critical. So do they have the user acquisition chops? Or they will have to rely on ours, and on our side, like we're still building up ours. Like I come from the U. I live in the U.S. I come from the U.S. and user acquisition is really good over there. That is a gap in this region, and so you have some folks who like really understand gameplay, like good designers, good tech. User acquisition is a huge gap, and so that does affect sort of how we think about this stuff. A lot of times you prefer sort of the full package, but if you don't have that, it's a very different type of deal, right?
Can you unpack that for a little bit for me? Because there is a gap there to address. How can games companies do it?
Yeah, one of the things that unfortunately there's this veneration of venture capital overall, and I did it for 6 years and think I was relatively good at it, but I did become a little bit disillusioned because what ended up happening is that it's become sort of this like trope now where it's like, well, you're not a real company unless you raise VC money, and like VC money is actually, I've used this term a lot of like, it's like rocket fuel, right? So like not every company is a rocket ship. Right. And so what ends up happening is just like they end up taking this rocket fuel and putting it in your car. And you're like, no, you messes up the car. Right. Like, because you need a trajectory of the business. And gaming's not really like that. Like, if you even think about how many gaming VCs there are, and they're very good ones that I admire a lot, like Convoy and Transcend and other players. But like the reality is just like it's not suitable for most gaming companies. And, I would say there's some gaming companies where it makes a lot of sense. Other ones probably does not make a lot of sense. And so that, I left sort of venture capital a little bit disillusioned. They're just like this one size fits all, right? When everything, when all you have, you've heard that saying and joke is like, when all you have is a hammer, like every problem looks like a nail. That's unfortunately what startups are actually looking at now. And that's one of the reasons I think like things like Pollen, I've gotten to know the Pollen team fairly well, and I'm super excited about what they're doing. It's fascinating about this idea of using sort of like different tools to fuel user acquisition. And it's actually just better for you, right? Like, why are you going to give up your valuable equity when you can actually take all these really interesting sort of like accounts receivables, financing or other debt financing? Probably is a better mechanism, assuming you figure out your user acquisition, right?
And as you said yourself, I mean, it's also a little bit of a financial literacy gap to bridge here, because it's not only understanding how to run your company, it's understanding the options, weighing them properly, saying, I've got this type of game, I have this type of UA, I've got my flywheel set, I can use X.
Yeah, it's about cultural fit. Legitimately cultural fit, right? Like the VC is going to be riding you, going like, why are you not growing this quarter? Why are you not growing this month? And that's, that's how they make their business. And that's the way that should be for them. But I think a lot of times companies don't always understand that, right? I think on both sides, like for better, for worse, like there's a flood of money because gaming has been on a tear this last year and a half now. And there are a lot of like generalist VCs coming to space because like, oh my God, there's opportunity, but without really understanding the dynamics of this industry and the specifics of this industry. So I think there's going to be a lot of tears shed on both sides.
So you're watching those emerging opportunities, those markets, those genres to watch. What about emerging VCs? Who else is there out to watch?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of great, there's a lot of new players coming about. There's some folks been around, I'm big fans of the folks at Convoy and Transcend. There's Bitcraft has a good reputation. London Venture Partners have done incredible investments. Griffin Gaming Partner is also on the rise as well too, out of LA. So, one thing I'm actually really, really surprised about is just how few gaming VC funds there are, like pure gaming VC funds. There's probably, when I did the research, like probably about a year and a half ago, the number was something like 35 to 40. There's probably now only maybe 50 to 60. When you think about how many thousands of VCs there are, like, in other areas like SaaS, for example, like, I mean, I think there's literally thousands of VCs just in SaaS alone. It is quite surprising in some ways. It is quite surprising that there aren't more VCs in this area, but I also think they're due to the nature of just like, there's also a lot of very, very cashed up publishers as well too, who are investing in sort of, there's a lot of strategics, I think, in gaming versus say in SaaS, comparatively to SaaS, where I think that is sort of what has, that is a little bit of a different dynamic, I think, in gaming.
What's interesting about your venture is, you're bringing past experience into that. It's about what you've seen in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. And how is that reflected in how this is, again, different from the others or has a different focus from the others?
I would say, Mark Twain said it's just like, history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. Like I am a little bit concerned of just like the flood of money that's actually coming into this space right now, not just from a strategic level, but even the VC level. And I would say particularly, less so from the gaming VCs, like, a lot of them have been in the space. A lot of them are from the industry, like Hero Capital is another one where like, these are very experienced, savvy folks. They come from the gaming, they come from the gaming space, so they actually really understand it. I'm a little bit more worried about the newbies who are coming in who aren't from the gaming space, so like generalist VCs, right? Who are looking at this. One generalist VC I think that's doing a great job is like Andreessen Horowitz, because they've hired a bunch of gaming people, to sort of like, to really invest, and they've done a great job there. That one is probably the exception and sort of like more of the exception and less of the rule. There are a lot of generalist VCs coming in and they haven't done their homework. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of valuations skyrocket. You're seeing them doing investments willy-nilly. And because they aren't from the gaming space, I think they know more than they actually do. I don't know how they can actually help their portfolio companies. And so that is a concern, right? Rising valuations. And then you go, if the valuations are higher, but you can actually help them, that's good. The valuations are going up, but you can't help them, that's not good, right? Because then you both lose in the end, and that's something I'm quite worried about.
Well, we are looking to the future, so I'll stay with you there. Let's look to the future together. Zooming out to gaming overall, where do you see the big opportunity, or perhaps for that matter, the big consolidation?
What has been interesting? I've said this before, and I've stole this basically from a guy named Michael Ball, who's probably I believe he's at Maker Fund, if I recall correctly, or Play Ventures, one of them, like both very good funds as well, two very, very good firms, fellow Canadian. And he had a very, very good analysis about the gaming industry that is very different than, say, for example, SaaS or any of the sort of like the traditional technology businesses. And basically what he says, and if you actually look at the data, it's actually quite spot on. So in traditional sort of like, say, technology, so going from say microcomputers to PCs to laptops to mobile, there's massive cannibalization. The players that actually do well on mobile have just completely destroyed a lot of like the sort of laptop players. The laptop players destroyed a lot of the PC players, like, and their market share actually shrinks, but the industry shrinks, right? Of that space. That's actually not what happens in gaming. So, for example, if you look at sort of like the spend in arcade games, kind of the same, right? And so if you look at the spend in console, the same and actually growing. And there's actually some very, very big players there. If you take a look at like the PC games, or you look at the mobile games, even every genre of the mobile games, look at VR, AR, like these are all spaces that are just continue to grow. And so what ends up happening is if you're really, really strong in the console game, you actually aren't too worried about like cannibalization of these PC players and vice versa, right? Like it is very, very, it's one of those dynamics that is like, it's competitive within sort of like I'm going to say the platform, but it still continues to expand. And so new players, for example, like, I'm going to say a lot of like the players like Nintendo or Sony, like or even Microsoft, like I don't think they're worried about like what's happening in, with like Supercell, right? Like, great, Supercell's doing well. Like, who cares? It's like, that's an interesting opportunity, but it doesn't really affect their business. And so the cannibalization is actually happening sort of to the rest of media, not within gaming. And so this is one of those like really unique, when you truly say just like, it's not a winner take all market. And that drives sort of like really interesting behavior versus in SaaS, which is an area I know very, very well. Like, one player wins at the expense of other folks. And so it is very terrifying. So it's just like a lot more competitive and not a lot more, people just tend to be meaner in general. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it doesn't. It's interesting how you're framing that opportunity, because it's true. I mean, first of all, we've seen gaming explode, right? In particular, because we're confined to our homes. But the point is that you're just seeing it go from one platform to another platform. Digital physical is not even a problem. I'm talking to one company I was talking to, Statement Games. It's like the teams are coming to him and saying, I'll be on your platform because there are no live games. So let's figure this out together. So to your point, there isn't that cannibalization. It's always this complementary dynamic as well, which is great for you because that means plenty to invest in, plenty to build.
Opportunity. Yeah,
plenty of opportunity. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's literally sort of like we've moved, in some ways, gaming is sort of like, it's less about scarcity. I remember like the CEO of Netflix said this one thing where it's just like, our competition isn't like other TV stations or like streaming. It's actually, I remember he said it's like Fortnite. He actually identified like video games and you're like spot on, Fortnite. Right? Like, like it's very spot on of just like where the market share is coming from is other media.
Yeah. It's where we spend our time, our attention, the attention economy. We're spending it in games. I'd like to wrap up with a couple questions about how you spent your time, Marvin. Okay, we had the big reset. I think you may have used some of this to start your blog. Tell me about your blog and what you've been doing, sort of work from home and building this.
Yeah, so you have all these ideas and thoughts, and there is something about just like putting your pen to paper, right, and getting your thoughts on paper and sharing a lot of what I think were like really hard learned lessons and observations over a almost 20-year career in tech, right? I did startups. I was a corporate exec, growing them internationally, and then a VC for 6 years. I invested in over 414 startups. You learn something along the way, and sharing a lot. I remember I do a lot of mentoring. I speak, I do a lot of public speaking, but this was just one way where it's like, well, this is just a good way to sort of pay it forward. Hopefully sort of like people learn something from these experiences, and was helpful for me. It was therapy for me just to get it down on paper, and it helps you really fine tune a lot of your thinking when you write. As you know, right? Like when you have these ideas, you write it down, you're like, wow, this makes no sense at all. Or maybe like it clarifies stuff more for you.
Yeah. Where can I find it?
Yeah, it's at hardfork.substack.com. And so these are just my observations. I usually do 3 posts a week, and it's free. I just do it's for my own therapy, and try to be of service to the world, I guess. Small service.
What about the other blogs out there? What are your go-to sources for news and all things gaming, all things ad monetization, all of the above?
Like I read everything. I watch tons of YouTube videos in general. I study a lot of stuff in crypto. I guess I'm what they call like an omnivore. So I read a lot of stuff on Medium. I read everything and anything, to be honest. And media, I come from a digital media background. So a lot of stuff that's happening in media right now is going to affect gaming, right? Like media is a precursor for like disruption for almost everything and anything. And so what's happening right now is just absolutely fascinating to me, right? You're seeing this rise of the creator class. The other area that I'm really interested in is like, the low code, no code movement. So it's become easier and easier. If you think about what technology does, there's a democratization where it's like how hard it used to be for programming. There's all these tools now where just to go build stuff way easier, right? The building a mobile app now, like 5 years ago, you have to raise like $500,000. Now it's like probably 50,000, like just all the tools that are available now. It's changed. The game has changed.
Yeah, we have become makers. I love it. The game has changed. That's a pun, but I bet you didn't expect to do it. That wasn't what you had intended. Convoy is another one. They're using, I think, a lot of low code to get games up in Africa and emerging countries. So to your point, there's a lot of opportunity because we can all get involved, right?
I think you have to. I don't know if you looked at like the number like just like blew me away last year. And this is not gaming specific, but just about entrepreneurship in the US. Like I saw this number that was just like shocking to me. Just like how many new businesses, like the level of new business registrations in the US last year was something like 2x over the year before, which like you wouldn't think otherwise. But bear in mind, the US also has like literally like no safety net, so you almost kind of have to, and so I think like the explosion of entrepreneurship in general, the tools are available. I also think people having more time now, even if you do work, like doing side hustles, just explosion of entrepreneurship in the US, and I think globally, and it's not just the US, I mean globally overall. As awful as last year was, there's a renaissance. I think there was a real creative renaissance that's going to come out of last year.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is exciting because Renaissance, renewal, new opportunities, as you said, and to look at new regions as well, which is what you're doing. So Marvin, thanks for sharing your views. Thanks for sharing this very positive view of what's ahead. It's great to have you on the Hive.
Thank you. It's exciting times.
Stay up to date with our show schedule by signing up for alerts at Pollen VC. That's where you'll also find our suite of financial modeling tools to help you plan and manage your business growth.